How on earth are you supposed to listen to somebody and what they're saying in English and think about your response at the same time?
Well, you've got to think while listening.
That's a lot.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to WaiGuo Friends English. Thinking while listening in English is extremely difficult. We understand that. We did a video recently where we were trying to talk about how do you think while speaking in English? Well, listening is actually in some ways a lot harder because you're taking in this information. You have to process that information, and then you have to be able to give a response to that information. That's extremely difficult.
It's even more difficult if you are naturally introverted, like me. I'm really good at focusing on my inner voice, on my thinking, or I'm good at listening to a person, but it's very difficult for me to do both. I have to train myself to be able to do both in each language that I learn.
So here are 5 things that you can do to help you listen while you think, while you're processing this information from another speaker.
And steps that we've taken ourselves in order to be able to do this.
Number 1 is think in English. Think in that target language all the time. This is easier said than done, and we recognize that. But if you can practice it while you're having a small talk conversation by the office cooler, or if you can practice it while you're going about your daily life, then when you're in the moment, when you're in this intense where you're haggling down the price of something at business, or you're trying to talk to an employer or something like that, when you're in that intense scenario, it's going to be a lot easier to fall back on thinking in English rather than thinking in your native language.
What you need to do is make it a habit. And if you haven't made it a habit in other areas of your life, then why would you be able to do it in an intense situation or an intense conversation or an interview? It won't happen that easily. So if you're finding that you're having trouble thinking of a response while you're speaking, or thinking in English while you're listening and thinking and trying to sort through what a person is saying. Like you're hearing it, you're understanding, but you've got to be able to think about it at the same time. You've got to be practicing it in other places and in other ways.
Number 2 is gather basic information, not all the details. This is something that we have learned from helping people pass the TOEFL, is that a lot of times we get so focused on the details that we miss the forest through the trees. And we understand there is an element of detail gathering that needs to happen. You need to remember numbers and you need to remember dates, especially for reading comprehension and listening comprehension. We recognize that. But if you are struggling to be able to think while listening, like be able to process this information, then you need to go back to the basics a little bit and ask things like, who is actually talking? What is the topic? What is the setting? Where is it? When is it? What's the main point the speaker is trying to say?
Why are they saying this to me? Like, are they saying this because they agree or disagree with something, or because they want me to agree or disagree with something? Are they trying to inform me of something, or are they just trying to gossip? Like, it's kind of important to know why, or to recognize why somebody's saying something, because that determines whether you should really hang on to this information or whether you should really hold an opinion here or make opinion or think about making an opinion while they're talking, versus are they just looking for affirmation? Are they just sharing that they don't believe that this person did this? Like, how could they? Like, what are they doing? Being able to understand the topic and being able to understand especially why they're sharing this topic with you will help you understand how much thinking you need to do in the first place.
Number 3 is to mentally agree or disagree with some of the points while they make them. So if you have a person, they're giving you a whole list of reasons, they're breaking this whole story down, it's so much, there's just a lot of details that's going on. While they're talking, try to make a note, a mental note or even a physical note, and try to figure out what are some points that you very much agree with them, you strongly agree with them, or you strongly disagree with them. Hold on to those in your mind so that when they're at the end of that monologue, you can bring those back up. You can say, man, I really agreed. I really liked what you said there. Or I don't know about that point that you made.
This is one of the things that if you at least attach to one thing, then you can remember that and circle back to it after they're done talking. So some people are very long-winded and they talk and talk and talk, right? Some people are very straightforward and very direct and they say one thing and you're meant to do something with it. So if you're taking like the first thing or the second thing that they say, the seemingly main point or support for something, decide whether you agree with it or disagree with it right there. The more you practice this, the easier it will be. It will not always be easy, especially if they're talking about something that you really have never thought about before or you just don't care about. Okay, so this is one of those things. Fixate on one thing a little bit. Kind of get the gist of what they're saying in other ways and other things. Not the details, but the main points. But if you get this big bird's eye picture of the main things like we talked about in the last point, then with this point, you'll be able to agree or disagree. Whether you agree or disagree with their tone, the way that they're saying it, or whether you agree that it's just for them to talk about that person that way or not just. Whether you see the same evidence or not, or whether you think that there could be something else that nobody sees. There's all kinds of stuff that could be done with this in these kind of conversations.
The secret with this point is that even if you don't care, like let's say you really do not care about this conversation, what you can do is you can take out one point that is something that you significantly agree or disagree with, and kind of zero in on that. No, you don't have to talk about the broader idea of macroeconomics. But the person did say one example or one detail that you found pretty fascinating.
The fourth one is to ask clarifying questions. And guys, this buys you time. That's what this does. Okay, so if you're asking clarifying questions, you can ask about a point you don't think you fully understood before, or a point that they moved on too quickly from for you before you could decide whether you agreed or disagreed with it. Circle back to it and say, well, what did you mean here? Like, what were you saying about this? That's a way that for you to just kind of clarify. It's not rude to do that. It's okay to do that. Just make sure that you do it in a gracious way. Don't say like, you weren't clear about this. Can you say that again? Don't do it that way. But if you can say, hey, I didn't quite catch what you meant about this, then they'll take more time to explain what they meant with that one point, and you can continue the conversation based off of that. That asking clarifying questions is a lifesaver sometimes.
Yeah, and I would say that if you can figure out a way to do that where you can let them add more information naturally by the question you ask, that's a great idea. So don't just say, what did you say? That's not very good. Don't make them repeat what they just said. Ask them to go a little bit deeper to what they have already said.
Number 5 is an exercise you can do on a regular basis to help you prepare for thinking on the fly. And this is to take notes while you're listening to things regularly. I would do something deeper in conversation like a podcast or like a conversation video over a deeper topic. But instead of taking notes on what that person says, okay, you can do that if you have trouble catching the main points and the reasons why, the motivation for somebody. That's a good way to practice note taking. But in this scenario, what I want you to do is I want you to write what you think about what they're saying as they go. Like, think about, do I agree or disagree? I agree that everybody should know a little bit of macroeconomics, okay? Or I disagree with this guy's approach because this, and this. That's excellent. That's a great way to practice thinking on the fly while something is consistently being said. Don't pause the podcast. Don't stop. Focus on just kind of thinking that. And you might have to type this out if you are faster in typing on the computer. You might need to do that, or you can use shorthand writing or symbols to kind of decipher what you're doing. But don't just do it and then walk away from it. Go back and think about it for a second. Think about, okay, this is how I would respond in this case.
Yeah, a lot of times while we're listening, the conversation, the points are evolving. So what's really cool is if you can go back and maybe at the beginning of this podcast episode, you're like, I really don't like this guy. I don't like how he's communicating. I don't like what the information he's saying. I don't like his position. And then near the end of it, you might say, well, you know, there was a couple of good things in there that I thought was very valuable. If you don't practice that thinking process while you're listening, then you kind of miss out on that. And you either basically get this overarching, like, I thought that was bad or I thought that was good, when in reality there were parts of it that you probably agreed with and there was parts of it you probably disagreed with. You miss that by not having the skill of listening while speaking.
All right, guys, that's it for today. We did a video a while back on thinking while you're speaking, like forming a response in your mind while somebody else is speaking. It is related to this, obviously. It's going to be related to a degree, but you can go to that video and watch those 5 tips and see if you can start incorporating some of these into your daily conversations.
All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.